Ian Bremmer is the founder and president of Eurasia Group, a global political risk consulting company. Good morning, Ian. Good to have you on the program.
Sure.
So we learned from Norah's interview with President Moon last week that there seems to be a somewhat different approach to dealing with North Korea between President Trump and President Moon. What is a win for the two of them coming out of this day of meetings?
Oh, my God. I guess getting through it. This is not an easy meeting like it was when Prime Minister Modi from India came in earlier in the week. South Korea, before the impeachment of President Park, was getting squeezed with heavy sanctions from China because they were working more closely with the United States on North Korea, supporting this THAAD missile defense system. Now, this new opposition, liberal opposition party leader, President Moon, that's just been elected, he says, I want to talk to the North Koreans. He's more interested in a sunshine policy, and he absolutely wants to push back on the Americans so that the China economic relationship can go well again. It's incredibly hard for him to balance these things.
I'm so glad you're here because while some people are distracted with other stuff that's going on, this is incredibly consequential. And Mike Allen in Axios reports today that something happened, that there was a big White House meeting. This president is about to impose tariffs as high as 20% on China, on other countries for steel. What will that mean?
Well, so that is in the context of what had been the single best meeting for Trump in foreign relations since he became president was the Magic of Mar-a-Lago when Xi Jinping met with him, right?
But he's changed that.
But he's changed it completely in the last few days.
Right.
We now have yesterday's sanctions against a Chinese bank, 2 individuals, and a corporation because of engagement with North Korea. That's new. We have the intention of putting steel sanctions against the will of a lot of the cabinet, against a lot of countries, most importantly, China. We have a new $1.4 billion military deal to the Taiwanese, which in the last 24 hours, the Chinese have strongly protested against. All the while, the North Korea relationship is getting worse. South Korea is in the most challenging geopolitical situation right now of any developed country in the world. And what a time for President Moon to be here in Washington.
So how does that affect then dealing with North Korea?
Yeah.
It's going to make it much harder, right? I mean, I think, you know, what we know is that over the last 20 years, we've had a series of Democratic and Republican presidents that have seen North Korea as just too challenging. And so let's just pass it off for our children. And now, you know, they have more nukes. They have more advanced cyber capabilities. They have more advanced ballistic missile capabilities. And Trump is saying, I'm going to do something about this. Now, the good news is because Trump doesn't really care about human rights, his ability to work with the North Koreans and say, I want to cut a deal. And if he did, frankly, he'd get a Nobel that he deserved more than Obama's. But there's also a possibility that we end up with a direct confrontation with the North Koreans. And before either of those two things happen, the U.S.-China relationship is going to start to break. Because the Americans are pushing and the Chinese don't want to.
What about the death, Ian? I can't stop thinking about the death of Otto Warmbier. Yeah. All of this, it's so tragic to anybody who knows this story. Does that affect their strategy at all? In North Korea? You
know, not really. I mean,
change the stakes at all?
Otto's father was extraordinary in the way he spoke to the American people and the press following this tragedy. But it was really interesting to see that Trump himself and the White House did not use that to say, that's it. We're not doing diplomacy. We're coming after these guys hard. He's leaving the door open for direct meetings between the United States and North Korea. I think that's interesting.
Mm-hmm. So who has the lead here? I mean, it's been his established policy. There'll be 6-party talks. There'll be 6 nations dealing with North Korea.
Yeah.
Is everyone going to go their own way now? Does the United States take the lead? Does South Korea? Does China? Who's going to determine the course of these negotiations?
The Chinese had been doing more with the Americans on North Korea. They joined multilateral sanctions under the end of the Obama administration, in part because at that point Trump had already been elected, and so they're like, let's show that we can be constructive. They did cut back on coal purchasing from North Korea. They did shut down direct air China flights between Pyongyang and Beijing. But that's not anywhere near enough to force the North Koreans to the table. At this point now, the Americans are taking the lead.
We have to get to Russia because of the summit next week where they're going to be meeting face to face. What are you looking for? What do you think the strategy will be there on both sides?
Well, look, I think that this is going to be more of a media event than a substantive meeting. Trump has now met with every major leader in the world except Putin. And this is the big wind-up, right? Because this is the one that no one wants him to do, but everyone is titillated by. We're going to watch the body language. We're going to see if they're smiling. The media is going to go nuts. John McCain and Lindsey Graham, same thing,
the
right?
White House says that he has no agenda, that the president has no agenda. Is that
appropriate for them to say that? Because if they had said he had an agenda that was just written up by Rex Tillerson, the Secretary of State, no one was going to believe it or focus on it anyway. I don't think it matters.
But does Vladimir Putin have an agenda is the question.
Well, his agenda has been to undermine the transatlantic relationship, to undermine American interests in the Middle East and Eastern Europe, and he's been effective at that. But, ultimately, the scale of these investigations, which are now very seriously lawyered up, which means that they feel like they have a lot to go on, that is constraining the ability of the United States to do anything with Russia. So if he did believe that Trump was actually good for him, he has to be reconsidering that at this point.
all right?
Yeah.
Always
We'll
great
be
to have you
watching.
here, Ian Bremmer. Thank you.
We love it when you come to the table. Thank you, Ian.